Today's Anomaly introduces 32-year-old Kazuo Nagano, chairman of Japan's Toyota Shoji trading company through the 1980s. His company was well known for its strange advertisements promising riches to those who called in. But this is all a clever ruse for the fraud Mr. Nagano practiced, which cheated billions out of the most vulnerable members of Japanese society. Mr. Nagano is about to learn the deadly lesson that vigilante justice is rarely blind. Kazuo Nagano was born on August 1st, 1952 in Ina City in Japan's Chubu region. His father was disabled, which made his grandfather the primary breadwinner. His mother was a member of the Soka Gakkai Buddhist sect, which at the time was suspected of being a cult, and she accumulated a massive amount of debt. When he is 15, Kazuo's grandfather dies and he moves in with his uncle. After graduating in Kashihara City, the teenage Kazuo then got a job at one of Toyota's auto parts manufacturers called Nihon Denso. Despite being an entry-level employee, Kazuo had grander plans in mind: to get rich. Two years later, Mr. Nagano graduated from Nagoya University with a degree in economics and quit Nihon Denso. He decides to try his luck with other companies. This includes a stint at the commodity trader Okachi, where he was fired for investing customer money in adzuki, a type of bean. In March of 1976, he was arrested for pickpocketing at the Ogaki bicycle racetrack, where he was working at the time. On April 22, 1981, Mr. Nagano established the Osaka Toyota Trading Company. The name is a direct reference to the car company he made parts for at Nihon Denso. By the early 80s, domestic gold imports saw record highs in Japan, and speculation on gold futures was gaining popularity. Osaka Toyota began selling gold certificates which owners held in lieu of the physical bars. What little bullion that was held by the company is said to have been fake. Customers had not yet taken notice of this, and were enticed by the promise of as much as 12% interest to be paid monthly on gold certificates. This proved to be highly profitable, and in 1982 the company is renamed Toyota Shoji Trading Company. As this gains traction, Mr. Nagano sets up a number of proxy companies selling everything from diamonds to golf memberships. These too were fake. Television commercials from the time have been preserved advertising both Toyota Shoji and Toyota Gold. These commercials had lavish images and beautiful women, something not wholly unique at the time for Japanese advertising, but it certainly added to the appeal. The commercials mostly targeted the elderly, specifically those who live alone and have few remaining connections. Older, childless Japanese were conceivably at home watching a lot of television, and were especially at risk for fraud due to how easily they could be manipulated emotionally, which is exactly what Mr. Nagano did. Mr. Nagano would begin with cold calls, which if promising could lead to a home visit for further greasing of the wheels. From here, he would charm seniors by bringing incense and other appeals. His charisma would pay off in dividends, netting him billions of yen in profit in a relatively short period of time. Mr. Nagano began indulging in expensive cars like Lamborghinis, and at one point purchased a private jet. Famous performers would be hired for a successful brand of commercials airing around the clock. Soliciting through bait-and-switch tactics had become a social problem in Japan amongst housewives and the elderly, who were bombarded with aggressive and hypnotic commercials. Toyota Shoji was so profitable it became a main sponsor of Japan's Universal Wrestling Federation through the time they were partnered with the WWE. This, of course, was an unscrupulous means of doing business and would have dire consequences for those who fell victim to the spectacle that Toyota Shoji operated under. Mr. Nagano had become high off his ill-gotten successes and grew more belligerent with his riches. His company was said to have a toxic working environment with existing video footage depicting strange rituals to motivate employees. He was disdainful of unfavorable media coverage, sometimes lashing out about perceived scrutiny as he felt it endangered his life. Mr. Nagano was not shy to use the Toyota name to his advantage either, co-opting famous brands to cultivate further growth. He blatantly created links between his gold business and the automotive company as a confidence trick, which was said to have damaged it in the long run. Another Toyota Shoji company, located in Yamaguchi, saw a considerable hit to its reputation, despite having been named for its founder. But this was not enough. Mr. Nagano had greater plans to supply to the Indonesian Navy and to fund a clothing factory in Haiti. Neither of these came to fruition. He spoke of this as his galactic plan, fantasizing he would have as many companies as there were stars in the sky. In June of 1982, Mr. Nagano became involved with a religious organization called the Jodo Shinshu Shinrenkai. Much like his mother in the 60s, he was a devout follower of these newfound beliefs to the point of obsession. He insisted the teachings be disseminated to his employees, and made substantial donations to the Buddhist church. In March of 1983, Toyota Shoji was even preparing to set up its own religious incorporation in Osaka Station, though plans fell through before it opened and the project was scrapped. Nevertheless, throughout 1984 he continued to donate to Jodo Shinshu Shinrenkai using his various shadow companies, such as Belgian Diamond, Toyota Golf Club, or the Galactic Project. Despite his apparent piety, there was little effect on the ethics of his businesses. Indeed, he managed to swindle countless elderly out of their life savings, which for childless Japanese was devastating as there was no social security. It wouldn't be long before the consequences of his fraud would boil over, but what happened after would shock the world. In 1985, complaints were filed against Toyota Shoji Trading Company with the Kokumin Seikatsu Center, a consumer advocacy group and arm of the Japanese government. Most of these were in relation to unpaid interest on the gold bars. When customers demanded their gold, this too was denied. By April, one foreign employee of the golf division was arrested, triggering an investigation into the entire company. Police later arrested 5 more on charge of fraud, including Hiroshi Ishikawa, a former Toyota Shoji president. A 6th former executive was placed on the wanted list, Mr. Nagano himself. The number defrauded was quoted by the Financial Times as being upwards of 20,000, and the arrested were handed prison terms between 10 and 13 years for fraud. Over 20 billion yen was embezzled. Evidence emerged that although Mr. Nagano oversaw and directed the fraudulent acts, the gold scam itself was thought up by a member of his dozen-lawyer legal team, who he met with every month to find legal loopholes they could exploit with respect to door-to-door sales. Even as investigations were in force, the board sought to move finances and hide evidence. Mr. Nagano personally ordered 400 boxes of documents be shipped to Hong Kong, safely out of Japanese jurisdiction. It was later discovered there had been plans in place for this up to 3 years prior. This sets into motion the chain of events which leads to Mr. Nagano's assassination. On June 17, 1985, police questioned Mr. Nagano about his illegal wiring of funds overseas. He cloistered himself in his 5th-floor Osaka apartment near Kitaku Tenjinbashi. Journalists arrived outside to ask him questions, many of whom stayed overnight. The next day, 2 individuals identifying themselves as hitmen acting on behalf of 6 anonymous victims arrived at the scene. They were equipped with 16-inch bayonets stored in a backpack, though one photographer claims their demeanor was so calm he could hardly believe they were serious about their intentions to kill Mr. Nagano. The older of the assassins called out to Mr. Nagano, claiming he was a gentleman who would hear his side of the story before killing him. After no response, the men grew impatient and began aggressively attacking the doors of the residence, at one point using a chair to smash down the door and enter. The media did not follow them into the residence, nor did they attempt any intervention. 8 staff members, 4 of them private bodyguards, were intimidated by the men and backed down. At one point, one bodyguard was even offered a job working security for one of the assassins. The attack began around 4:30 p.m. One of the assassins was 56-year-old Atsuo Aida, who choked Mr. Nagano in the struggle. The victim was stabbed with the bayonet 13 times, and although he was rushed to hospital, he succumbed to his injuries at 5:15 p.m. He had failed to pursue any romantic interests in favor of business, ironically leaving him childless and alone at the time of death. The culprits made no attempt to hide themselves as they emerged in blood-splattered clothing and walked out the lobby doors, with Mr. Aida reportedly saying, "I am the criminal. Take my picture," as he posed for photographers. They are arrested by Osaka Prefectural Police outside with no struggle. Perhaps most shocking was the media's willingness to broadcast the entire affair uncut. The television station NHK showed at least 10 minutes of the crime. Police were not presently at the scene. The LA Times wrote that the Yomiuri newspaper, as well as Asahi Shimbun, received numerous complaints about the television broadcast. One television announcer broke decorum by telling viewers not to show their children. Within 2 weeks, Toyota Shoji filed for bankruptcy. As for the murderers, Mr. Aida was purportedly head of a far-right organization, Sei Shinkai, or the Honest Men's Club, and ran a shop for machinery and tools. Details on this political group are difficult to find. His 30-year-old accomplice, Kazuo Nagano, was a construction worker and also part of the Honest Men's Club. The pair of murderers received 10 and 8-year sentences respectively, considered light given the brutality of their crime. Even so, in 1989, the sentences are appealed. Efforts to recover the embezzled money are led by Nakabo Koi, an attorney-appointed bankruptcy trustee who represented victims of the Morinaga milk arsenic poisoning incident. But these were largely unsuccessful given the dire state of Toyota Shoji's finances at this point. As of July 2018, Mr. Aida is said to be living out his days quietly with his family, now in his late 80s. As for Mr. Yano, he is reportedly in his 60s and living with family in Hiroshima. The Toyota Shoji Trading Company incident continues to fascinate onlookers as the level of fraud has yet to have been eclipsed in Japan. Within Japanese pop culture, the incident inspired novels about the affair and a film starring Beat Takeshi. Internet users continue to debate the ordeal, with some still condemning the journalists who stood by and did nothing. By contrast, some claim the culprits were similar to modern folk heroes. Commentators speculate this is because the victims were defenseless elderly people, making Kazuo Nagano worthy of vigilante justice. That the press was so willing to capture the moment on film but not intervene in 1985 is telling of how Nagano was viewed then, and this attitude towards similar crimes holds strong. This anomaly reminds us that one's peers are ultimately the only relevant jury in the trial of life.